on my channel. We're not comrades on my channel. We're comrades on my channel. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is when we watch real socialism, not CNN socialism, not nonsense that conservatives are reading about on Twitter screaming socialism. No. The real socialism is far scarier and far more dystopian than anything you have ever seen on CNN. What we've discovered is that watching real socialist and even today communist, we are watching legitimately communist content, is in a glimpse, a sneak preview, if you will, into the dystopian future that we have waiting for us. Because the things that these people were talking about at their conferences and their events like 5 years ago are now talking points of the Democratic Party today. So it takes a little bit of time. It takes like you sometimes, like, some people like want to dismiss this stuff. They say, "Oh, those are just a couple of loonies. Oh my god, they only have a couple dozen people in the room." Well, guess what, guys? The socialists are winning. They're winning. They really are. If a couple dozen people in a library 5 years ago said something that I can then turn on CNN and hear their exact same talking points today, the socialists are winning. And just because it takes a couple of years, and not even very many in the grand scheme of things, for their stupid, crazy ideas to become reality, just because it takes some time doesn't mean they're not winning. And so by watching fully socialist content, we're going to have an idea of what we got coming to us if we don't actually get our asses in gear and do something about it, because they have taken over every major institution in our country. They have taken over the media. They have taken over education. They've taken over government. They've taken over religion. They've taken over entertainment. They have taken over every major institution, and they're not even shy about it anymore. And these people have such hubris that I am absolutely convinced that someday, on Socialism Saturday, perhaps, we will stumble upon a video on a YouTube channel that has like a couple hundred subscribers, and the video is going to have like 3 views, and it's going to be a complete and total confession about perhaps the 2020 election, perhaps something else. I don't know. But I am absolutely convinced that if we just watch enough of their content, eventually we are going to stumble on an absolute confession of how they have done what they've done, because these people cannot help but talk about what they're doing. They have such incredible hubris that they don't think there's anything that can stop them. They really don't. They think they're completely like on the track to winning, and that no one's going to work against them and nothing's going to stop them. And if no one is listening to what they're saying from opposing viewpoints because they're like, I just don't know how you watch that stuff. It's so hard. It's so hard to watch that. I just don't want to do it. It's too much. They're lunatics. I understand that position, but you are letting them win when you ignore what they're doing. It's like if you turn your back to them and you're like, I can't see you, I can't see you, I can't see you, I can't see you, they're going to be able to do whatever the F they want. The only way we stop them is if we listen to them and then believe them when they tell us exactly what they're doing. So that's what Socialism Saturday is all about, folks. We do it on Saturdays, aptly. Maybe not every Saturday, but plenty of Saturdays lately. And today we've got a really good stream that I'm really looking forward to. Now, last week, we discovered a YouTube channel. Well, I discovered a YouTube channel called Red May. And this is a group in Seattle who every May, they do Red May, where they post a whole bunch of metric fuckton crazy communist content. And we are talking like, again, this is not CNN communist. This is not like AOC. This is not Bernie Sanders. These are the real deal. And so last week we watched a panel from them and I thought it was actually a really very well done thing. And this week I wanted to return to them because they just have this one presentation called Freedom. And I was like, how are communists presenting about freedom? What are communists talking about when it comes to freedom? Let's read the description. Each year, says Ye, yeah, I don't have to pronounce, says Ye, who grew up in Stalinist Albania and lived through the frenzied free market transformation that followed. Check this out. I began my Marx courses at the London School of Economics by telling my students that many people think of socialism as a theory of material relations, class struggle, or economic justice, but that in reality, something more fundamental animates it. Socialism, I tell them, is above all a theory of human freedom, of how to think about progress in history, of how we adapt to circumstance, but also try to rise above them. Freedom is not sacrificed only when others tell us what to say, where to go, how to behave. A society that claims to enable people to realize their potential but fails to change the structures that prevents everyone from flourishing is also oppressive. We invited 3 radical thinkers, Michael, Martin, and Vanessa, to join Lee in conversation that explores what a robust left-wing vision of freedom might entail. Hint: it won't be about open carry or not wearing masks or being allowed to visit Cuba. So, I thought that this might be an interesting place for us to start. I want to know, what is a legitimate socialist version of freedom? Yes, Jan, exactly. So he grew up in a communist country and thinks it's good. Yes. Yes. The evil capitalists were taking over his country when he grew up. And so he thinks communism is good. Yeah, basically. Yeah. While Carlin is not the kind of tea I can enjoy every day, I agree with her core point of view about the nature of the threats to our civilization. Well, I appreciate that. You know, I do a lot of content. I do a lot of streaming. So come back when you want. Don't watch what you don't want. It's all good. Whatever's clever. Guys, please mount that like button for me. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And if you feel so inclined to support my work, you can head over to activelyunwoke.com/support. The link is in the description, and there are lots of ways to support my work. The first is by becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon. You can do anywhere from $5 a month all the way up to $250 a month, depending on what perks you want. You can get some cool swag and merch with some of those perks. I am very partial to the Mad Hatter handing out the red pill t-shirt. I think it's cool. It's one of the first things I designed after I took the red pill myself. I love it. You can get it by being a $25 a month donor on Patreon as a thank you. Now, if Patreon's not your speed, and I totally understand that, what I would encourage you to do is to join my Locals community. Locals is the place where I do spend the most time, where I do interact with the most people. We do 2 Zoom calls every single week on Mondays at 7 p.m. and on Wednesdays at noon. I also do invite my Patreon supporters to join those calls, by the way. They're not just like Locals exclusive calls. They're supporter calls for people who would like to join. But they are private. They are unrecorded. Some of them go on for hours at a time. And, you know, I was talking today I ran a book club today for my book, and we were talking about how social support is so important and how the people you surround yourself with is so important to fighting back against the woke left. Because if you are not surrounded by good people, you will lose your mind. And so that's why I have built my Locals community the way I have. I wanted to support a supportive community, a kind community, a community of weird bad news bears style dissidents who lift each other up when times are tough. That's what you're going to find in Locals. When you join, by the way, if you join tonight, we're doing movie night tomorrow in my supporter Discord. That's one of the perks you're going to get by becoming a supporter on whichever platform you like. And we're doing movie night tomorrow. I think we're going to be watching Nightmare on Elm Street. There's actually a poll in Locals, and Nightmare on Elm Street is winning. It's either going to be Nightmare on Elm Street or Wishmaster for Halloween, of course. I voted for Nightmare on Elm Street myself. I'm just saying. It's one of the best movies ever made. But you're going to get that when you become a supporter on Patreon, Locals. You can also join on Substack if you're so inclined. And that is how you can support my work. And let me just put a little ticker banner up. That has my Locals information specifically. But you can head over to activelyunwoke.com/support if you would like to join somewhere else. And we'll look forward to that. But guys, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, listen. I didn't have time to go to the beer store today. Why? I was sitting around knitting. It's my Saturday too. And then I ran a book club. And then I had to do some stuff. And now I'm here. So I don't have any beer today because I didn't go to the craft beer store. But I've got some bubbly. If you guys have some snacks, now is the time to get some snacks because we're going to be sitting here a while. I also have Blue Heat Takis. The most fiery, the most spicy of all Takis. Basically like popcorn. If you've never had Takis, they're the fucking best. So, Takis. I've got some bubbly. If you guys have something fun to eat or drink, please share it in the chat. Andrew was making some enticing bacon today when we were doing book club together. No, I don't have hard liquor. I don't keep hard liquor in the house. But if you guys want beer, you can drink beer. Just because I'm not drinking beer doesn't mean I don't have to drink beer all the time. I drink beer for happy hour. But that's all right. We're going to survive without beer, I think. Maybe, you know what, Victor actually went out to run an errand. Maybe I should text Victor and be like, can you bring me back some alcohol, please? Because I've got a 2-hour socialism thing to sit through and I might want some alcohol. So maybe I'll get my husband to run to the store like a good supportive partner. But let me get this set up, guys. We are watching Freedom Through the Eyes of Socialists. This is a long one, 1 hour and 42 minutes. So hunker down. Get a snack. Let's get this party started. There's no sound yet, just so you know you're not missing anything.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Red May. Sorry we got a late start this morning. Before we get to the Freedom panel, I want to clue you in to what's coming up for the next weekend, because we are down to our last 5 of 27 events in the month. Today at 3 p.m., we have What Was Neoliberalism with Sarah Bruyette, Nikhil Pal Singh, Joshua Clover, and Jamie Merchant. Tomorrow, Saturday at 11 a.m., Uno Koza's Theory of Crisis Today. Richard Westra, Ken Kawashima, Wendy Matsumura, and Gavin Walker. On Sunday at 11 a.m., There's No Such Thing as the Economy. Samuel Chambers, Cordelia Belton, Edward, and Soren Mao. And on Monday at 11 a.m.,
they have someone named Mao presenting. Are you shitting me?
Journal to partner on a panel on
what
Ukraine,
kind of irony is that?
Imperialism and the world economy. That includes Ilya Matveev, Rebecca Carl, David McNally, and hopefully broadcasting from Ukraine.
Hang on, sorry, I was muted because I was eating. I didn't want you guys to hear my Takis Blue Crunch, but what I love about this guy, one of the things I love about communists is communists don't give a fuck. This guy is presenting in his kitchen with dirty fucking dishes behind him and like bottles strewn about and like a cleaner in the background. Like you'll see the women. I didn't watch any of this, but like here's what's gonna happen. I've watched enough socialist content now to know the women are gonna show up. They're not gonna be wearing makeup, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. But it's very rare for like socialist or communist women to like wear makeup. Their hair is gonna look disheveled. They're all gonna look like vegans. They're universally gonna say 18 words to say something when one would have sufficed just fine. I love that this guy is literally presenting from his kitchen with his dirty dishes on the counter, his guitar case in the background. It's just like, man, this is how you know this is the real deal socialist content right here.
Yulia Yurchenko, author of Ukraine and World and Capital You can, I forget the exact name of the book. It's great. It's from Pluto Press. Anyway, that's what we got. We also have a movie on Tuesday night, Electra My Love by Miklos Jancho. If you happen to be in Seattle,
I'm not hating on the guitar case, Andrew, but isn't it funny that it's by the sink? Why is it by the sink?
So without further ado, before we go to Lake Star, wait, I got to do a pitch for money before
why is the guitar case by the sink?
If you like what we do, want to see it happen next year, which will be our 7th year.
This is where they embrace capitalism.
Really amazing when you think of a communist festival being produced.
See, communist festival. Told you, communist.
We need your help. We need money. We don't get institutional support. Go to www.redmayseattle.org and press the donate button. It'll give you either our Patreon or our GoFundMe, Fan the Flames of Red May. Be generous. We need you. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to the host of today's event on freedom, my Seattle neighbor, Michael Hart, who teaches at Duke University. He's the co-author with Antonio Negri of the trilogy Empire, Commonwealth,
is this the same guy
Multitude,
from last week?
Also Assembly.
This guy last week was incapable of asking any
Hi, Michael.
coherent
Welcome
question.
back to Red May.
Thanks, Philip.
And you're muted.
I'm muted.
No, he's not.
Let me figure that out.
Communists don't know how to use technology. Every time, communists don't know how to use technology.
I should be unmuted, but I'm still muted.
No, Michael, you are
you
not
can hear
muted.
me. Okay, good. Here we go. So yes, I'm Michael Hart. I'm as moderator of this session. One notice before we started, it was advertised, and we were expecting until quite recently that that Martin Haglund would be participating in the event, but at the last minute, due to other events, he isn't able to participate with us. So the discussion we have here will start with Leah Upi.
Ooh, those talkies are hot. Let me tell you what, my mouth is on fire right now, but they're so good.
And Vanessa Wills, who teaches in the philosophy department at George Washington.
Those talkies are not for the faint of heart.
Leah will begin, and then we'll turn to Vanessa, and then I have prepared organizing.
Phil says he does not represent all who are named Phil. That's right, Phil. Your reputation.
Questions or comments?
Oh shit! Hang on, I did that by accident. Hang on, we're gonna go back and we're listening to his introduction. I just want to say, Phil, he stole your name just like Lydia stole my haircut. Did you guys see yesterday on Timcast? Lydia stole my fucking haircut. I'm so mad about this. Not really, but she did steal my haircut. Come on. We all know who had that haircut first, and it wasn't her.
Of Free, which has just come out also in 2022, about which I think Leah will begin the discussion today. So I'll pass it to you, Leah.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for having me in the panel.
Yeah. Bitch stole my look, asshole stole Phil's name.
In socialism and in capitalism, and about my book, Free, Coming of Age at the End of History, which is a slightly unusual way of writing and talking about freedom. It's an autobiographical book.
So this is the woman who grew up in Albania when the capitalists apparently were taking over, and she likes socialism better.
It's a coming of age story.
She's the one that teaches Marx in her course at the London School of Economics.
That talks about a little girl who grows up in communist Albania, convinced that she lives in the freest country in the world. And then a year after the Berlin Wall, the end of communism arrives to her country, and she also discovers at that point that the world that she thought was a free world was not so free after all, and especially that her family, whom she thought were always committed communists, are dissidents who have been hiding from her the history of their family and how they felt about communism throughout their lives. And so it's a coming of age story which talks about freedom as an ideal, as a delusion, as a set of ideological slogans, as a promise, as a betrayal, and does it by talking about how freedom looks like in socialist societies, how it's promised, but also how it was delivered in real world socialist states, and then in the transition to liberal capitalism and the costs of that freedom. Now, rather than explaining what the argument about freedom is in the book, I'm going to read from the epilogue, in which the which is the very end of the book, in which I talk about my contemporary take on freedom and how I got to the views on freedom that I hold now. And why.
Okay, I want to do a quick pause here because we're starting to get some audience. I just want to say this. If this is your first time watching Socialism Saturday, I don't want you to feel bad if you don't understand what they're saying. These people speak a different language. They might be speaking English, but it is not the same language that most of us speak. And so the regulars on Socialism Saturday will be able to tell you that it takes a little bit of getting used to. You will learn how to speak it if you listen to it. It just takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of practice. And if you feel like you're going like crazy, like you're like, I understand the words they're saying, but it just makes no sense. Just wait. Just wait. It's going to be fine. And so just like trust that it will happen. You will learn through osmosis and you will start to understand them at some point. The other thing I want to say is this. These people take 18 words to say something when 2 do. This is why this is a 1 hour and 40-minute presentation. So like sometimes we just need to sit and we need to wait and we need to let it play out to really understand what they're saying. But if you happen to catch something that they're saying that you're like, hang on, this sounds like a crazy thing the Democrats did like last week, please call that out in the chat. Because one of the things I want Socialism Saturday to really do is to be able to identify what talking points and what strategies are the Democrats taking from the real communists. So if there's something that you hear them say, because I might not pick up on everything, I don't have to be the smartest person. Like you guys can be way smarter than me. That'd be great. But like, if you hear them say something and it's like, that's something that AOC said like 3 days ago, call it out in the chat and let us know. I do pay attention to the chat and I will display it on the screen and we can talk about it. Okay. You don't need to send in a super chat to do that. If you want to send it in super chats, that's fine. That supports the channel and I greatly appreciate them. But if you're making a really good, solid point in my chat, or if you just make me laugh, I'll show that on the screen as well. So sit back, hunker down. We're going to get through it together.
Why I think freedom is a concept central to both liberal and socialist traditions, something that socialism develops rather than rejecting from that tradition. And so I'm going to read from the epilogue where I explain how this particular story of growing up in Albania under communism and then having lived through the transition took me to where I am teaching Marx and having this particular conception of freedom. So I'm going to read the epilogue, which starts like this. Each year, I begin my Marx courses at the London School of Economics by telling students that many people think of socialism as a theory of material relations, class struggle, or economic justice. But that in reality, something more fundamental animates it. Socialism, I tell them, is above all a theory of human freedom, of how to think about progress in history, of how we adapt to circumstances, but also try to rise above them. Freedom is not sacrificed only when others tell us what to say, where to go, how to behave. A society that claims to enable people to realize their potential, but fails to change the structures that prevent everyone from flourishing, is also oppressive. And yet, despite all the constraints, we never lose our inner freedom, the freedom to do what is right. My father and my grandmother did not live to see what became of my studies. After quitting his career as a politician, my father was thrust from one private employer to another, each time blaming the dismissal on his poor English and increasingly his rudimentary computer skills. To facilitate his job searches, the family moved to a flat in the capital close to the old botanical gardens, now one of the most polluted areas in the country. His asthma deteriorated. One summer evening, shortly after his 60th birthday, he had a violent asthma attack. He rushed to the window and opened it to breathe, but was wrapped in a cloud of carbon monoxide and dust. My mother was in Italy when my father died. My parents had reconciled, but she worked there seasonally as a carer or cleaner to help offset some of our new debts, while her siblings in Albania chased their old confiscated properties. Those efforts, which my grandmother had always deemed a waste of time, came to fruition a few months after her death, following that of my father. A large chunk of coastal land was sold to an Arab property developer, and our fortunes changed overnight. I no longer needed to count my last pennies until the next scholarship installment. I could enjoy meals out and drink late in bars, discussing politics with my new university friends. Many of those friends were self-declared socialists, Western socialists, that is. They spoke about Rosa Luxemburg, Leon Trotsky, Salvador Allende, or Ernesto Che Guevara as secular saints. It occurred to me that they were like my father in this respect. The only revolutionaries they considered worthy of admiration had been murdered. These icons showed up on posters, t-shirts, and coffee cups, much like the way photos of Enver Hoxha, our old socialist leader, would show up in people's living rooms when I was growing up. When I pointed this out, my friends wanted to know more about my country. But they did not think that my stories from the 80s were in any way significant to their political beliefs. Sometimes, my appropriating the label of socialist to describe both my experiences and their commitments was considered a dangerous provocation. We used to go to a large open-air concert in Rome for 1st May, and I could not help but reminisce about the parades of my childhood on Workers' Day. What you had was not really socialism, they would say, barely concealing their irritation. My stories about socialism in Albania and references to all the other socialist countries against which our socialism had measured itself were at best tolerated as the embarrassing remarks of a foreigner still learning to integrate. The Soviet Union, China, the German Democratic Republic, Yugoslavia, Vietnam, Cuba, there was nothing socialist about them either. They were seen as the deserving losers of a historical battle that the real, authentic bearers of that title had yet to join. My friend's socialism was clear, bright, and in the future. Mine was messy, bloody, and of the past. And yet, the future that...
So did she just basically say that real socialism has never been tried? And that's, I mean, that's, you know, it's like, dude, come on. Like last week's Socialism Saturday was actually interesting because the entire premise of it was real socialism has never been tried. They actually acknowledged the horrors of communism. They acknowledged all the things that went wrong, and they were like, but we can do it better. And it seems to me that she's already starting off with real socialism has never been tried. Real socialism is not what I had in Albania. Real socialism is the future. That, holy shit. It seriously didn't even occur to me that that would be the premise of this presentation. That when they said they wanted to talk about their vision for the future, their literal vision for the future is all previous socialism efforts were not real socialism. Real socialism only exists in the future. Oh my God. We should play socialism bingo, but I'm going to need a couple more weeks to develop a socialism bingo card. Maybe you guys can help me with that. We'll make it a project. Let's develop a socialism bingo card for Saturdays.
That they sought, and that which socialist states had once embodied, found inspiration in the same books, the same critiques of society, the same historical characters. But to my surprise, they treated this as an unfortunate coincidence. Everything that went wrong on my side of the world could be explained by the cruelty of our leaders or the uniquely backward nature of our institutions. They believed there was little for them to learn. There was no risk of repeating the same mistakes, no reason to ponder what had been achieved and why it had been destroyed.
Ooh, we have a troll. Dude, bro, you waited like 5 minutes to subscribe to this channel just so you can say that. But what you really should have done while you were waiting to subscribe to my channel is you should have searched my channel for the 18 times that I've talked about why I said, yes, Hitler went to heaven, and it has nothing to do with the Holocaust, and it has nothing to do with whether or with me thinking Hitler is a good person, because Hitler was a horrible person. Hitler was possibly one of the most evil people that ever lived. But I happen to not believe that hell exists. I only believe that what people conceptualize as heaven exists, which I don't even really call heaven, and that everyone goes there, whether they're Jew, Christian, atheist, whatever. So the reason I said that was because hell is not a real fucking place. How do you want anyone to go there? But you're welcome if you want more information to search my channel because I've done like 18 videos about it. You can avail yourself of those videos. And this is a good reminder for everyone. We have 2 rules in my chat. There are 2 rules. The first rule is don't be a dick. The second rule is no whining. Don't be a dick, no whining. So, if you come back and you swear at me again, you're going to get blocked because you are breaking the don't be a dick rule. But if you want to participate nicely, because you obviously waited the 5 minutes to be able to chat in, you're welcome to do that.
Their socialism was characterized by the triumph of freedom and justice, mine by their failure. Their socialism would be brought about by the right people, with the right motives, under the right circumstances, with the right combination of theory and practice. There was only one thing to do about mine: forget it. But I was reluctant to forget. It's not that I felt nostalgic. It's not that I romanticized my childhood. It's not that the concepts I had grown up with were so deeply rooted in me that it was impossible to disentangle myself. But if there was one lesson to take away from the history of my family and of my country, it was that people never make history under circumstances they choose. It is easy to say what you had was not the real thing, applying that to socialism or liberalism, to any complex hybrid of ideas and reality. It releases us from the burden of responsibility. We are no longer complicit in moral tragedies created in the name of great ideas, and we don't have to reflect, apologize, and learn. We're doing a reading group on Das Kapital, a friend told me one day.
Yes, exactly, Luke. I was
you will learn.
Hang on, this doesn't relate to Socialism Saturday, but it's funny you mentioned that movie, Luke, because I literally talked about that movie yesterday on stream. Yes, my conceptualization of what happens after we die is not too dissimilar. Okay, it's a little dissimilar. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's a little bit like defending your life. That's right. That's exactly right. Not in the way that you're going to get judged. I don't think you're going to get judged and sent back, but like in terms of having a life review, yeah, I think Hitler did that. I think everyone does that. Oh, it's one of the best movies ever made. We need to watch Defending Your Life for movie night. It is so good. It is, it's such a classic.
About real socialism. So I did. When I read the opening pages on the preface, it felt a bit like hearing French, a foreign language I had been taught as a child but rarely practiced. I remembered many of the key words: capitalists, workers, landlords, value, profit, and they echoed inside my head in the voice and simplified formulations of my elementary school teacher, Nora, adapted for school children. Individuals, Marx wrote in the opening pages, are dealt with only insofar as they are the personifications of economic categories, embodiments of particular class relations and class interests. But for me, behind every personification of an economic category, there was the flesh and blood of a real person. Behind the capitalist and the landlord, there were my great-grandfathers. Behind the workers, there were the Roma who worked at the port. Behind the peasants, the people with whom my grandmother was sent to work in the fields when my grandfather went to prison, and about whom she spoke condescendingly. It was impossible to finish reading and just move on. My mother finds it difficult to understand why I teach and research Marx, why I write about the dictatorship of the proletariat. She sometimes reads my articles and finds them baffling. She has learned to weather awkward questions from relatives. Do I really believe these ideas are convincing or feasible? How is it possible? Mostly, she keeps her criticisms to herself. Only once did she draw attention to a cousin's remarks that my grandfather did not spend 15 years locked up in prison so that I would leave Albania to defend socialism.
That's actually a pretty legit complaint.
We both laughed awkwardly, then paused and changed the topic.
Yeah,
it left me feeling like someone who is involved in murder.
Yeah,
as if the mere association with the ideas
her family
of a
thinks she's
that
crazy.
Destroyed so many lives in my family were enough to make me the person responsible for pulling the trigger. Deep down, I knew this was what she thought. I always wanted to clarify, but didn't know where to start.
I will say this though. So on the point of her family thinking she's crazy. So obviously I don't agree with the things she's saying, but is it really that dissimilar from those of us who have family who thinks that we're crazy because we don't buy into the narrative bullshit. Is it really that dissimilar? I mean, that can't be an easy experience. So I'll have some empathy for her, even though I think she's batshit insane. But it's a sad position to be in. That's all I'm saying.
I thought that it would take a book to answer. This is that book. At first, it was going to be a philosophical book about the overlapping ideas of freedom in the liberal and socialist traditions. But when I started writing, just like when I started reading Das Kapital.
Yeah, this is a fair point too, but these people want to destroy the family anyways. That's true. If you guys are new, you haven't seen some of the previous socialism streams, go watch the stream I did about the woman who wants all childbirth to happen via surrogacy and to have no more biological family unit. When they say they want to destroy the family, they literally mean they want to destroy the family. So I guess that is a fair counterpoint.
Ideas turned into people. The people who made me who I am. They loved and fought each other. They had different conceptions of themselves and of their obligations to other people. They were, as Marx writes, the product of social relations for which they were not responsible, but they still tried to rise above them. They thought they'd succeeded.
Oh no!
But when their aspirations became
that's not
reality,
what we're watching. No,
their dreams turned into my disillusionment.
Not in any way.
We lived in the same place, but in different worlds. These worlds overlapped only briefly, and when they did, we saw things through different eyes. My family equated socialism with denial, the denial of who they wanted to be, of the right to make mistakes and learn from them, to explore the world on one's own terms. I equated liberalism with broken promises, the destruction of solidarity, the right to inherit privilege, turning a blind eye to injustice. In some ways, I have gone full circle. When you see a system change once, it's not that difficult to believe that it can change again. Fighting cynicism and political apathy turns into what some might call a moral duty. To me, it's more of a debt that I feel I owe to all the people of the past who sacrificed everything because they were not apathetic. They were not cynical. They did not believe that things fall into place if you just let them take their course. If I do nothing, their efforts will have been wasted. Their lives will have been meaningless. My world is as far from freedom as the one my parents tried to escape. Both fall short of that ideal, but their failures took distinctive forms, and without being able to understand them, we will remain forever divided. I wrote my story to explain, to reconcile, and to continue the struggle. So this is the epilogue, and this is where my
you're
book
good, dude.
ends. And
hang on. So I just want to do a quick pause for people who've just entered because we've had some more people enter. What we're watching is not feminist content. This is real these are communists. These are real communists, socialists, whatever you want to call them. But this is from a communist festival in Seattle. So we're watching the real deal. They do not call themselves feminists. I don't know that maybe she personally thinks herself like that, but I've watched a fair bit of socialism content now. Like, they do not call themselves feminists. So we're watching the most leftist of the left.
I guess the question where I have ended up in my research as well is about how to think about freedom in the aftermath of the fall of the Cold War and the end of the Cold War and the fall of real world socialism, and a way of approaching freedom as a socialist with those failures behind our shoulders. And I guess the version of socialism that I have ended up with is one where you have to be aware of the constraints of history. And so this idea of Marx that kind of keeps coming up in the epilogue, which is that we never make history under circumstances that we choose, but to which Rosa Luxemburg adds, but we make history nevertheless. And the question for me is what can be rescued and how should one approach this history of socialism and the kind of real world institutions and the real world constraints on freedom that there were under socialism, but also how can we approach that history in a way that is not just a history of denial and rejection, but something from which we can learn in developing socialism for the future, and how central the idea of freedom is to that version of a socialist future. So that's where I'll just end up, and then we can carry on discussing afterwards.
there. Terrific. That's great. And so now we turn to Vanessa. As I mentioned, Vanessa Wills is in the philosophy department at George Washington, and her forthcoming book in 2023 from Oxford University Press is titled Marx's Ethical Vision. Vanessa.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. So there's
pronouns.
A few things I want to do.
We never see pronouns in this.
Just kind of say a bit about the personal and political and social context at this moment. So I'm here in the United States. I'm in Washington, D.C. And this week have been
look at all that
closely following a sort of torrent of disturbing details to emerge from Uvalde, a small town in southern Texas, relatively near the border with Mexico, where there was a school shooting, 19 small children murdered. And we're learning a bit every hour, really, about the various catastrophic failures, miscalculations, examples of
just because the police are colossal failures, and I don't just mean in Uvalde, I mean pretty much everywhere, does not mean that communism is the answer. How do you think your communist utopia is going to be enforced? Of course, they're going to take advantage of a tragedy, though. Here's what she's really doing. She's taking advantage of a tragedy to push gun control, because if we have gun control, that is going to make it a lot easier for them to implement their little Marxist utopia. Remember, guys, 4 goals of the woke left are always gain as much power as possible to destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia. Always, in everything they do. Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia. Well, you're also, we are always under the no dick and no whining rule. Yes. If you're a regular in the chat, you can pretty much get away with what you want, but like, especially if you're new in the chat, like, again, 2 rules. Don't be a dick, which includes you don't insult me. But you sure as shit don't insult my regulars in the chat either. Don't be a dick, and no whining. I can't. I am too old to have adults whining at me. I can't do it. I'm sorry. All right, let's continue.
Sheer cowardice on the part of the local police, who we now know stood by for an hour, hearing gunshots and not following their own protocol to save these children. And there's lots to reflect on. One piece that's relevant for us here and for
that's interesting,
what I'm about to,
Mansa.
talk about is, we're
I like that.
Called upon to put things out of our minds so that we can be productive, so that we can just function in a extremely destructive, inhumane set of conditions. And this is a week where I'm less successful at that compartmentalization than usual. It's just a incredible outrage that is very difficult to accept, that we ought not accept. So with that being said, I want to use my time to start with some relatively
fucking nuclear
theoretical reflections on the concept of
nuclear. I don't feel bad about unblocking you because you have like 87 accounts.
Writings in Marxist theory, and bring that into connection with some ongoing long-term social crises that have been unfolding in slow motion for a long time, especially in the US, and relate that to a way into thinking about the status of the U.S. population and then its relationship to the rest of the world, right? The relationship of working people, poor and working people in the U.S. to poor and working people worldwide. So I'm going to say a word that sometimes when we try to understand and explain Marxism, we try to run away from. That word is dialectics. But I promise I'm going to bring this down to a more concrete level. So if we're going to understand the concept of freedom for Marx's thought, or for any attempt to theorize and understand the world, applying a Marxist method.
No, she said dialectics, which is language, and language is how these people trick you. They use language as their most powerful weapon to trick you. They know if they can influence the language, they can change the culture. That's why we always have to be very, very careful when we're listening to them. How are they defining things? It's kind of like how they use the term whiteness, but whiteness doesn't mean the color of your skin. Whiteness means capitalism. It means free markets. It means anything that opposes communism. That's what they really mean for people who haven't heard. So people get very confused when they hear whiteness because they think it has to do with your skin color. No. Non-white people can still embrace whiteness because the definition they're using for the term whiteness isn't about your skin color. It's about capitalism and private property and things like that.
Then we have to think about that concept dialectically, and specifically what this means for us and for what I'm about to outline here is we have to think about the ways that freedom in practice,
fucking Derrida and Foucault, Jesus Christ,
ends up,
I'm sorry,
being realized in a way that from which its opposite, unfreedom, emerges.
Are you
right?
shitting me?
So we can think of freedom and unfreedom, or freedom and subjection.
Freedom and unfreedom. What does that sound like to you? What does that sound like? Freedom and unfreedom? I'm getting twitchy. What does that sound like? No, come on, guys. I know you know what this sounds like. Freedom and unfreedom? We have entered the land of 1984. Except they're serious. They're serious. That is 1984 level Orwell, man. Freedom and unfreedom, are you shitting me? Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. That's Orwell.
As conceptual opposites and as pure abstract concepts,
they think freedom is slavery.
We can think about them separately, right? But in practice, they interpenetrate, right? Where certain kinds of freedoms exist and unfold, we find also that they directly give rise to unfreedoms. Marx talks about this, especially in the context of what we might call a kind of bourgeois freedom, right? Capitalist freedom,
yes.
The freedom of
double
the ruling
plus
class
ungood. Exactly, Foos Monkey.
Conditions which are conducive towards the satisfaction of their conditions of success, conditions of flourishing. The ruling class, the capitalist class, is able to impose upon the rest of society those conditions in which it flourishes as a class, right? In which it is able to realize its aims. And
so what she's saying right now, I want to point this out. What she is saying right now, she just said the capitalist class is able to basically do everything to support the flourishing of the capitalist class, okay? This is no different from Nicole Hannah-Jones and the 1619 Project saying that white people built up society to enhance the power of white people to the detriment of everyone else. It's exactly the same thing. I'm going to rewind and I want you to listen to her again. When she says capitalist class, I want you to hear white people. And if you replace white people or capitalist class from her, the socialists, with white people, you are literally going to get what Nicole Hannah-Jones argued in the 1619 Project. It's the exact same. Let's just rewind and listen to this.
But in practice, they interpenetrate, right? Where certain kinds of freedoms exist and unfold, we find also that they directly give rise to unfreedoms. Marx talks about this, especially in the context of what we might call a kind of bourgeois freedom, right? Capitalist freedom, the freedom of the ruling class to have those conditions which are conducive towards the satisfaction of their conditions of success, conditions of flourishing. The ruling class, the capitalist class, is able to impose upon the rest of society those conditions in which it flourishes as
the ruling class, the capitalist class, is able to impose the conditions on society that make sure it flourishes. Now let me change it. The ruling class, the white class, are able to impose conditions on society to make sure it flourishes. That is the basis of the argument of systemic racism. All you need to do is replace capitalist from the communists with whiteness or white people, and that is literally the basis of systemic racism. The thing that won Nicole Hannah-Jones a Pulitzer Prize, it is directly the same. That's amazing. That's an amazing clip, actually, to teach people this. Whiteness does not mean your skin color. Whiteness means capitalism.
A class, right, in which it is able to realize its aims, and its aims, of course, are the accumulation of profit. Oftentimes, that's directly at odds with human aims, with the aims of people living in society, which is an aim to survive, hopefully to survive in conditions that allow human beings to enjoy their lives, to enjoy various kinds of creation, to find themselves confirmed and realized in their productive activity. These things are very much at odds with the freedom of capitalist exchange, with the freedom to conduct business in a way that is insulated from the interference of the masses, of the public. And this is useful to think about when we think about various ways of conceptualizing an apparent opposition between the interests of the individual and the interests of society, something that comes up quite a lot when we think about liberal theory. And in that opposition of the individual and society, and here it's usually the capitalist individual and society, we see an echoing, right, of this notion that one side of this is a site of freedom, and the other, society, social control, the needs of society, the interests of society, in at times limiting the kinds of unrestrained freedom that capitalist individuals can participate in, right? society is then associated with unfreedom, subjection, right? A kind of threat to the totally free activity of an individual agent.
Holy shit. I never thought about this before. Taxes to fund services were tied to property to eliminate property rights. The government could direct bill you, but then you'd own your property again. I never thought about property taxes like it's basically like a tax on people who own property. Well, it is that, but I'm thinking about it in a way that like they're trying to like it's a redistribution of wealth. Holy shit. Did any of you guys see that that video? I tweeted it out. There was a video that kind of went I don't know if it went viral on Twitter, but it was so funny. It was this young girl who got her car registration bill, and she was like, "Why the fuck do I have to pay them $400 to register my car?" And then her brother or something was trying to explain like, "You have to do that every year." And she was like, "But like, why do I have to pay $400? I already bought the car. I already paid for my fees." And brother was like, "Well, that's like an annual thing. You have to do that." It's like, "Why?" She was like, "Well, it funds things." And she was like, "But don't taxes fund things?" And I was like, I sat back and thought about it. I was like, what does car registration pay for? Does anyone in the chat actually know? I do know now because I asked on Twitter. I was like, what does car registration pay for? Do you know what car registration pays for? Not only does it pay to fund the DMV to like make sure that there are more people to process car registration pays for the production of license plates so that the government can track your car. Just really think about that for a second. We're paying car registration to fund the production and the maintenance of the system and like the software that allows the government to track our cars. And like not just like the license plate, but like the thing that they use to like plug the license plate number in the administration of the license plate system. How effed is that?
And we see that in lots of ways in the United States, and is of course, given the preface, the context that I offered a moment ago, one way I'm thinking about this is in relationship to the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which grants the right to bear arms. And of course, there's a great deal of contestation, right, about what that right actually endeavors to guarantee. But I'll leave that to the side. Maybe.
You know what, Phil? I think this is a great suggestion. As governor of New Hampshire, I will get rid of all car registration. Absolutely. As governor of New Hampshire, I will also make the property tax optional because 2/3 of my property tax goes to fund the public schools, and I don't want to. As governor of New Hampshire, I will also make it legal to have a pet fox in New Hampshire, because I learned this morning, and I'm very upset about this. I learned this morning that it is illegal to have a pet fox in New Hampshire. Who's saying I can't have a pet fox? I want a pet fox. I will make it legal to have a pet fox in New Hampshire on day one with an executive order. On day one, I'm doing 2 executive orders. I'm putting cameras in every public school classroom in New Hampshire, and I'm making it legal for people to own a fox as a pet. We're going to domesticate them. It's going to be great. The more domesticated foxes, the less wild foxes that are eating chickens. It'll be good for everyone.
Can think about it in the Q&A. So in the United States, you would think that given the incredible free reign of gun manufacturers, of gun sellers, and of individuals, right, to buy and sell firearms, to carry them openly, to carry them to acquire them with very little state interference whatsoever. You would think that given that the U.S. compared to other countries that are most similar to it, right? You would think
in the last 2 weeks of my gubernatorial campaign for New Hampshire, I am doubling down on the campaign promise of everyone in New Hampshire can own a pet fox. This is going to be my great closing, my closing statement. I'm like, I've been talking about the school stuff for months, but you know what I'm really going to get votes for? People can have a pet fox.
think the fact that the U.S. has these absolutely unique, right, completely free play when it comes to the acquisition and carrying of firearms, you would think, given that it's a quote unquote democratic country, that this reflects a great passion on the part of its populace for weaponry and for having as much weaponry as freely available as possible and for having as little social interference
You
in
love it, Stevie.
individuals' freedom,
You love it.
so-called, to carry arms. But that's not the case. Gun control is actually extremely popular as a policy in the US.
And it
so
shouldn't
again,
be.
Very recent polls in 2021, a Gallup poll found 52% of Americans want stricter gun control. And when we look at recent polls just in the past year, and
why are we? Well, of course, I know the answer to this question. I'm asking a question I know the answer to. I don't want trolling in the chat, okay? In a presentation about the future through the eyes of communists, why are we hearing about gun control as a major talking point? Because it seems to me like we could have had a perfectly nice presentation about what a future communist utopia looks like without there being a 20-minute soliloquy about gun control. Why do you think that the communists are pushing so hard on gun control is really popular? To force us to comply. Exactly. In an Orwellian way, gun control. I will bet you, Alexa, I will bet you money that at some point we are going to hear from these people. Gun control is freedom. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Gun control is freedom. That's going to happen at some point. It's going to be something like that. Man.
Some cases just in the past week, that's very consistent. Anywhere between 52 and 59% of Americans do not support the conditions that we have. And so it means that one of the ways, well, this alone doesn't mean it, but this gives us some reason to entertain, in any case, the possibility that what looks like the political freedom of people in the United States to affect the conditions in which they live, especially something as vital as taking steps to limit the brutal slaughter of their children. This gives us the fact that this is not something that is immediately politically feasible in the US, that when we talk about it, we have to talk about it in terms of a massive social movement intervening into the current state of things is what will be necessary to change this. It gives us some reason to question, right? What is the content of political freedom?
Oh my God. Alexa is like the queen. Alexa is queen of the chat tonight because she's making so many good points. Alexa, being queen of the chat, or king of the chat as it were, means you can say whatever you want. You can even break the rules. You can break the don't be a dick and don't whine rule, and I can't ban you. So because Alexa's making so many good points, queen of the chat for the night, when you have no guns Everyone is finally free to have peace of mind that they will not be threatened by shooters. Don't worry about us invading your homes to make sure you aren't hiding any. When we have no guns, you will finally be free.
Citizens of the United States. And it means one of the, as it suggests, that one important way, one important lens among others to think about the real situation of people living in the United States is as a subject population. So we're familiar with this, of course, in all kinds of contexts, right? When we think, for example, about the state of people of color in the United States, this ought to be a very familiar lens for thinking about these questions, right? And thinking about the relationship between freedom as it's conceptualized and guaranteed in theory, and then what this kind of freedom actually looks like in practice. In Uvalde, the town that we're learning, the town that we're still learning the complete depth and contours of the tragedy and the compounded crimes that occurred there. The police get 40% of the town's annual budget. Right. And
that's not a good enough excuse for capitalism and gun confiscation.
In spring 2020,
it's not a good enough excuse.
Massive uprising of activism in the United States.
Here we go.
Oriented around the demand that Black Lives Matter, the demand and the statement, right? Both a descriptive and an imperative that Black Lives Matter. And one of the demands of that movement was defunding the police, right? And instead, that has not happened, right? Of course. And we have police with these massive bloated budgets at the same time that famously our schools are incredibly underfunded.
What?
So one of the things many of you watching have
false,
probably had this
wrong.
Experience.
Schools are not underfunded.
One thing that is always jarring in a way is to find oneself in conversations with people from various countries around the world, especially as a U.S. resident, and to find the stark separation between what U.S. Americans regard as absolutely normal and what people in other countries, especially similarly wealthy countries, regard as
absolutely
unthinkable, right? That is shocking to them. I was recently in a conversation of this sort with a person from Europe who said, "What do you mean teachers purchase their own school supplies?" But of course, in the US, polls show that teachers on average spend about $1,000 a year, $750 to $1,000 a year on purchasing supplies for their own room. So these teachers that were in this school, they had purchased the supplies, right, for their own students, most likely, to help and educate them. Meanwhile, they, when they needed help, the police, who were incredibly well-funded, incredibly well-armed, there's a SWAT team for the small town of Uvalde, did nothing, right?
Just because the police suck doesn't mean we should become communists.
There's a passage that
Jesus Christ. Oh,
Marx.
Phil. Jesus. Phil is having some feelings tonight, guys. Let's all make a nice comforting space for Phil. All right? We love Phil. Phil, thank you for the super chat. I really do appreciate it. This fucking bitch is crying crocodile tears regarding school shooting. She's never held a gun nor used a gun before in her life. She doesn't know fuck about fuck regarding purchasing gun or gun safety. All her points a bill and void. I don't know what a bill and void. Phil, I hope I did your super chat read. Do you guys notice this is how we know Phil is in a mood? There's no punctuation in his super chat. Null and void. Null and void. I thought that's what you meant. Okay, let me read it again. Because Phil sent in such a generous super chat, I'm gonna read it proper, okay? Okay? This fucking bitch is crying crocodile tears regarding school shootings. She's never held a gun nor used a gun before in her life. She doesn't know fuck about fuck regarding purchasing a gun or gun safety. All her points are null and void. Excellent, Phil. Excellent. Well done. Thank you.
That I particularly wanted to read today as part of my remarks. And it's one of the places where Marx is trying to help us to understand the dialectical, and in this case, I mean the inner contradiction, right, of the concept of freedom, and the way that we have to think about these freedom or freedoms.
Well,
right.
When we make socialist bingo, we will have Phil raging as a bingo square. Absolutely, Andrew. That's a great idea. That was great.
In terms of their practical expression, and that when we do look at them in their practical expression, we're then led to understand the way that they play out, right, in a way that guarantees their very negation and opposite. And Marx writes this in The Civil War in France. He says, "The civilization and justice of bourgeois order comes out in its lurid light whenever the slaves and drudges of that order rise against their masters. Then this civilization and justice stand forth as undisguised savagery and lawless revenge." And we see this again and again, globally, of course, not just in the United States. It's one of the things that is, I think, the most difficult to help people to understand and to incorporate into their theory of the world that they're experiencing, right? The extent to which people in the US are propagandized, the extent to which what we have is often not best thought of as a lack of the freedoms that are spelled out and guaranteed in our documents, our Constitution, in social studies class, when you're a kid growing up. Oftentimes, instead of thinking about this as a lack of those freedoms or the deprivation of those freedoms, oftentimes what we're getting is, in fact, what it really means to have a society that expresses in as exaggerated and highly developed a way the internal contradictions and the hypocrisy and the inner rottenness, right, of
say it,
of a system and of a
capitalism,
set of ideals.
Capitalism, say it.
Inherently, can think of the interests of society, think of public interests as a kind of unjust intrusion on the free play of the rulers.
So what she was saying there is that our society, the people, like our culture, makes a big deal about all these freedoms we allegedly have to make people believe we have all these freedoms, when capitalism really prevents us from having any freedom, because you're only free if you're beholden to the collective and the collective good. And the fact that we prioritize individual liberties and make a big exaggerated show, those are her words, not mine, of like the individual liberties that we have, is just to negate our responsibility to the collective. That's essentially what she just said. But now what I wanted her to say was like I wanted her to use the specific word of capitalism, but she was waffling around it. But that was absolutely the idea that she was expressing. She was just waffling around it. Yes, individualism is bad in their eyes. That's why she's saying, you might think you have these freedoms because we make a really exaggerated show of doing these freedoms, but really, you're only free when you're beholden to the collective. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. The government will own your business, and you will be happy. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is strength.
I think, I'm going to wrap up here. But I think that this is something we don't talk enough about. And I think, and I hope, I guess, that it can be a key to thinking about the ways that...
Hang on. King Peter of the chat is in the house. King Peter is perpetual king of the chat. Peter says, these people believe infinite taxes are real freedom. Taking anything they say as reasonable or correct is a fool's errand. I agree with that, Peter, but we listen to them to point out these little inconsistencies. So yes, they do believe that being beholden to the state will provide people the most freedom, because people will be free to do what they want if they just give up all responsibility in private property and private business and work towards the collective. Freedom is slavery. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate the super chat.
People living and working in the United States ought not to think of themselves as sharing
and they're winning.
Interests.
They're winning
with the rulers of the U.S.
Hang on.
We have
hang on. I want to rewind that and listen to what she just said. But yeah, we watched Socialism Saturday because we need to take these people seriously, because these people are winning. They are kicking our asses and they're not even trying that hard. These people are great at organizing and great at staying focused. Don't let the fact that they look crazy and speak in flowery language fool you. They are winning, and that's why we need to take it seriously. Elena, thank you for the super chat. Nothing says freedom more than the freedom to be locked in a gulag. Exactly. Well, I look forward to the time I'm going to spend with all of you in the gulag. We do Socialism Saturdays on Saturdays, around about 6 p.m. if I feel like it. Please mount the like button if you have not already. Please consider subscribing to the channel. I don't do all socialism content. I do all sorts of crazy content. My content is all over the place lately. I have like 15 different content streams going. But I'm glad to be here with you guys, and I hope I can help decipher some of this. And I'm looking in the chat for your thoughts as well, and I will display them on the screen when you make them. But I want to listen to just this last part real quick, because she said something that was interesting.
And I think, and I hope, I guess, that it can be a key to thinking about the ways that people living and working in the United States ought not to think of themselves as sharing interests with the rulers of the U.S. We have much more in common with people around the world,
like where,
who are being deprived of their freedom,
like Venezuela,
by our rulers,
like
by
where?
Our politicians. And that we have to understand. Failing to understand it will not only make us ineffective in being in solidarity with people around the world, but it's completely antithetical to us being able to properly understand our own position within the US and what is necessary in order to achieve real liberation, in order to emancipate ourselves and be free in a way that captures the aspirations of everyday working people,
Leonard,
to live
like
good
China
lives. Thank you.
I imagine that is very true, Phil.
Good. Thanks, Vanessa.
I don't know if I can say that word without getting
demonetized,
demonetized, but thank you. I
several
appreciate
things
it.
that I want to talk about, but let me try one that I'm hoping that could bring together some of the things that both Leah and Vanessa presented, even though, of course, as everyone can see, we're dealing with different geographical and historical locations. I wanted to start, though, with a question about maybe call it the contradictions of freedom that you both
I
are
have nothing in
presenting, or
common
the
with this
limitations.
cunt.
I'm not sure exactly the right way to think of it. And one of the things, of course, to do is correct me when I mischaracterized or misunderstood what's going on. It seems to me that one of the things fundamental with what Leah is working with is the boundaries between freedom and necessity. I mean, Leah, you come back several times in the book, and you do in that epilogue to the quote from the 18th Brumaire about that people make history, but not under circumstances of their own choosing. And I think that's one way for you to discuss. It's not exactly, it seems to me, not exactly the dialectic that Vanessa is working with, but the way of understanding.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it.
In different social and national contexts. Like I'm very interested, for instance, that your presentation of Albania is very different from at least what I've understood of German notions of Ostalgie, like of the nostalgia for the East.
Well, welcome and correct. Mike Harlow doesn't have a job. He lives off daddy.
Want to recognize and appreciate the accomplishments within a certain historical circumstance. So I guess he's also going to say,
he made a whole video about me.
What
didn't
vision of freedom do we have when recognizing the limitations of the circumstances in which we accomplish it? And I guess one of the things that I would be interested to hear what you say, Lee, about is the how one overcomes the ideological pressures of thinking freedom in terms of individualism, which I think that Vanessa, that's one way of connecting.
Holy shit. Did you guys hear what he just said? How do we overcome the ideological pressures of thinking of freedom as individualism? Let's rewind and let him say that again. How do we overcome the ideological pressures of thinking of freedom as individualism?
In which we accomplish it. And I guess one of the things that I would be interested to hear what you say, Lee, about is the how one overcomes the ideological pressures of thinking freedom in terms of individualism, which I think that Vanessa, that's one way of connecting the two. Okay. Yeah, I mean, also the other thing we have to develop, I think, Leah, especially from the way you put it in the epilogue, is the internal bifurcation that you're recognizing with yourself of the way that socialism had been thought in the socialist regimes, Albania, first of all, and the European and US or European and North American conceptions of socialism that's going along with this, which anyway, it seems like an opportunity for that. But mostly it's about, I'm thinking about the freedom thing, because with Vanessa, I think it's quite different with the dialectic that you're thinking. And in fact, primarily it seemed to me, Vanessa, what you were arguing for is to recognize to unveil the false notion of freedom that bourgeois ideology has inculcated in us.
False notion of freedom.
The passage that came to mind for me while you were first talking was the one at the end of chapter 6 in volume 1, where Marx is saying, for the perspective of the market, from what he's talked about so far about commodity exchange, this is the Eden of freedom, equality, Bentham, and there's the fourth one I can't remember. But there it is clearly a bourgeois notion of freedom and of equality that he wants to mock, or, well, if not mock, at least undermine.
What does he mean? This is a pop quiz. What does he mean when he says bourgeois notion of freedom? Does anyone in the chat know? I know I'm on a slight delay, so I'm going to wait for your answers. And while I'm waiting for your answers, I just want to say hi to people watching on Odyssey. I want to say hi to people watching on Rockfin. I want to say hi to people watching on Rumble. And I want to even say hi to people watching on Getter, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I do always stream on alternate platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, Getter, even Facebook, I think, but I don't really advertise that. But yes, exactly. So you guys got it right. So when he says like bourgeois, anytime they say that, what they mean is not upper class. Well, upper class technically in a roundabout way. Capitalism, capitalism, capitalism. That's what they mean. Capitalism, capitalism. And as Sin is pointing out, for these people, capitalism is synonymous with individualism. Okay? They use the two interchangeably. When they say bourgeois, they mean capitalist, they mean private property, they mean individualism. That's why they're saying individual liberties. People believe they have these individual liberties, but really they don't know they're slaves to the government. We have to get used to hearing when they use fancy flowery language. Anytime they say whiteness, bourgeois, ruling class, landlords, bosses, they mean capitalism. And they're attacking it because capitalism supports individualism. Individualism is their enemy because they think that people are only free when they are beholden to the collective, as the collective meaning the state.
Because of the...
And just for anyone who might not know, like that, like you might be new here, I'm not talking about an academic definition of these things. That's not my jam at all. I am talking about a practical, like, this is what they really mean in the real world. Like when they're just using it in casual conversation, that's what they mean. I don't use academic definitions because I think they're too confusing for people. I think we need to get right to brass tacks to say, what do you mean when you say this? Capitalism is individualism. Bourgeois is capitalism.
Individual commodity owners who come to the market, and they're free insofar as they can exchange their commodities. But of course, he's showing quite quickly that to undermine that notion of freedom because they're constrained to sell their labor power, blah, blah. I mean, and the passage you point to in the Civil War in France, it's different. It's more of a political version rather than the economic conceptual one. But it's similarly about the rottenness of bourgeois civilization that comes to the core.
Capitalism.
Once it's threatened. And that I think what you're getting at is that the freedom that we have to unburden ourselves of the ideological notion of freedom that we've been fed, or that we, and in order to recognize the different freedom, but still in both of what you've presented so far, and I know that you both have ideas about this, and this is what is then that freedom once we...
Yes, what does freedom mean to you, Michael?
Operations that both of you are proposing, which seem to me exactly right. I still want then the characterization of what that...
Thank you, that bitch. I appreciate that.
That we're left with is, or the possible freedom that we're left with is, and how one would characterize that. I think the last part I asked is too hard, but I mean, or I'm not sure what I would say. That's when I judge something is too hard. You guys are probably better at me than this. So, but sorry, I think I've given you enough. I hope it's concrete enough to begin. In fact, Leah, why don't you begin just as a... It'd be nice to go back and forth too, because I think even though what you're both
This
working on
guy
is quite
loves to
different on,
talk. We saw this last week too. He says a
I
lot
can
that doesn't mean
recognize, and I hope
anything.
we can bring out a way that they speak to each other clearly. Yeah, Leah.
Unmuting. Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think I wanted.
So, Brooklyn Way, does Kendi get paid in social credit score points? Well, no, Kendi gets paid in capitalism, as we know. But you know what's interesting? So one of the channels that we use for Socialism Saturday quite a bit is a channel for Haymarket Books. Haymarket Books is a socialist publisher. Haymarket Books is are the people who run the Socialism Conference. And the Socialism Conference, which we streamed maybe about a month ago now, is what started Socialism Saturday, because they had a live conference. I live streamed it. And it was a genuine socialist contest, or conference rather. The reason I bring this up is because on Haymarket Books YouTube channel, do you know who's on there? Ibram X. Kendi. They got a whole video with him. I just haven't watched it yet, but it's absolutely there.
To go back to this, maybe to link a bit your question about the kind of recognition
I need to do a video
of the
called
inner
Ibram X.
contradictions
Kendi
of
is a
freedom, as you put
socialist.
it, with what Vanessa started with, which is what dialectic is in a way, where in a way dialectic is exactly the recognition of these contradictions, but with this idea of a motion and of a movement going forward, where the recognition of the contradictions serves as a springboard for developing ideas better, but also for understanding historical circumstances better. And so I think so one of the things that comes up when in this, Marxian saying that freedom is the consciousness of necessity, that I also try to grapple with in my book. And, how is it, what kind of vision of freedom do we have when we recognize what, as you said, this kind of limitation of circumstances? The way, I think this is something that the Marxian tradition generally really struggles to hold together, because there is an element of agency and of will, and something that is not reducible to circumstances, which in some ways gives the emancipatory push and the aspiration to a collective movement on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have the recognition of the importance of history and of the fact that no idea is ever completely disembedded. No set of imperatives is ever completely detached from the institutions that realize that set of imperatives. And so I find that the way I have tried to reconcile this is by developing a kind of version of what I call Kantian Marxism, which is basically, which kind of explicitly brings out the element of will, the element of freedom, and where freedom is basically a sense of moral responsibility about being a human agent, namely someone who has reason, someone who thinks of other people as ends in themselves in the kind of Kantian moral theory, and who also always thinks not just of the individual, but as the human being, as an agent embedded in particular social relations. And where this kind of moral imperative of being in moral social relations gives you then the foundation for a critique of society that is not limited to a critique of a particular context, but that tries to take the whole world into its kind of sphere of concern.
I have no idea what she's saying right now, so if anyone has any ideas, I really have no idea what she's saying.
Oh, Kant, okay, in the sense of the whole world is your unit of concern, and a very deep humanism in the sense in which reason is the central element there, and there's and the awareness of freedom comes through this awareness of kind of reason as distinguishing human beings from other species, which is also very important in the early Marx, for example, when he talks about alienation as the estrangement of the worker from the real human being, from his human essence. It's also something that I think Vanessa was bringing out when she was talking about this tension between the capitalist class and a capitalist class that basically creates the structures of unfreedom that basically make people unable to see themselves as members of the human species, but always forces them into particular categories. And some of the
capitalism is unfreedom. Here's what they're really saying. Capitalism is unfreedom. Individualism is unfreedom. You are only free when you are beholden to the collective.
These categories are exclusive and others are oppressive. But basically it's about recognizing the divorce between the human being as a member of the human species, which has these kind of moral concerns, and the human being as an occupant of a particular social role, like the capitalist or the working class, and so on. And from that,
there it is.
In this kind of divorce, generating the critical insight that is necessary to criticize the circumstances. So basically, that's all, I think. where I end up theoretically. A lot of Marxists obviously have problems with that, because in some ways, I guess the more materialist aspect of the theory is not as much emphasized in that story. It's a more of a kind of Kantian Hegelian story that then uses the Marxist tradition as a way of understanding why is it that, the modern society didn't actually realize, didn't institutionalize the freedom that it promised in its institutions, but where Marx is almost like an appendix to Hegel. And it's only if you kind of read these three authors together that you understand how is it that we can keep together this tradition of both understanding the centrality of human agency and the centrality of human will and of freedom in history on the one hand, but also the fact that
the disadvantage that these people have is that they cannot explain their own philosophy in a way that average people understand. So you're just like, you have to read Marx and Hegel and blah, 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 blah. And if you can read all these people together, then you will understand us. Well, normal people aren't going to read all those people. They aren't going to do it. Now, that is both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage in that these people have been doing this out in the open for effing decades, and because no one takes the time to listen to them and no one takes the time to read their literature except for people like James Lindsay, they get away with what they're doing because people don't take the time to read their literature. But even if people did read their literature, a lot of times they wouldn't really understand it. And in order to fully engage in in order to fully implement their little cultural revolution, they need to come up with something that average people are going to be able to wrap their heads around. Now, how they're trying to do that is by weaponizing young people through indoctrination in the schools. That's how they're trying to do it. This is why they took over the education system, because they want to get people when they're young so that it's easier for them to understand all this stuff and it's easy for them to get the stuff in their brain. Like people like me, I didn't go through this type of education. I missed it by like that much because they weren't in the K through 12 schools as much as they are now. They were still there, but they weren't as much as they are now. They had the colleges, but I happened to go to like when I went to Boston University was a very conservative school. It's not now. Now it's gone leftist insanity and is the home of Ibram X. Kendi. But when I went there, it had a very conservative chancellor that wasn't taking any of this bullshit. So that's why they're taking over the schools, because if they can get these ideas in the minds of young people when they're young, it's going to be a whole lot easier.
Freedom always needs to be institutionalized to be kind of real, to be, it needs to be rights and it needs to be a set of obligations, and it's always realized in a specific context. And from there, I think, is a way of so this brings together, as I say, this kind of more Kantian element, which is about the foundations of freedom, and this more Hegelian element, which is about the institutional conditions in which freedom is realized, and then the Marxian element that points out why is it that the modern state is incapable of satisfying this demand for freedom that its subjects make by talking about the constraints that the capitalist system poses to the state. And I think that's connected then to your last question in a way, which is about the way in which socialism is understood and reflected when socialists in the West kind of think about socialism, which was my target almost in my epilogue, which is this very abstract way in the end of thinking about socialism. Because if we take seriously this historical dialectic, if we take seriously the idea that ideas in history are never just ideas, they always become institutional reality, then the particular concerns of the place and the specific historical circumstances will make a crucial difference to how these ideas are delivered. But the worry is that the tendency is that whenever we approach non-liberal contexts or liberals that are kind of outside of the historical center, the historical kind of center of concern in a way, which is mainstream liberal countries, then you always have this more paternalistic or more exoticizing way in which, instead of engaging and thinking about the history of these places and thinking about the tradition and the institutions and the lack of institutions in a way in which these ideas were realized, you think, oh, it's because, they're backwards, or they don't really understand, or they're totalitarian, or they have this kind of authoritarian figures that can't do away without the authoritarian personality. which is in a way a very orientalizing way of reading history outside the kind of core liberal center. And I'm sure something of this will also resonate with minorities within core Western countries. So it's an attitude that they have to people and states outside the core area of concern, but also I think an attitude that they have to minorities within the state, where again, because these histories are not sufficiently represented and not sufficiently
I don't know what she's saying.
and engaged
I have no
with
idea.
Details,
this happens sometimes when we're watching socialism. No idea what she's saying.
Then they're not really seen as sources of learning, but just as something that gets kind of excluded from the way in which the stories are told.
I have no idea what you just said.
Before you come in, Vanessa, I wanted to ask a specific question to Leah, that just to keep the continuity of it. I understand well, and it seems right and great to me, your critique of the way that Western European Marxists misunderstand the conditions of the socialist projects but what I don't get yet from the epilogue or from what you just said, maybe just because I'm not quite.
Hang on, Nom Nom
right,
Yam is saying something that I think is this is definitely a possibility. She is saying people don't understand what freedom is because people are used to the system that prevents people from realizing what true freedom is. Basically, she doesn't understand what she's talking about. Yeah, so this is basically when they said earlier that what did he say? Like the societal like inclination to perceive individualism as freedom. That's what she was talking about. Thank you. And now Alexia says, I think she's saying that even liberals who recognize socialist things will talk about them as if they're strange and not common, which means they're being oppressive. Oh, so they're trying to normalize it. Got it. Thank you, guys. This is a team effort.
But a coordinated critique of their proposals, and I'm not really sure who the Western Marxists are at this point, of freedom or of socialism. I think that's part of what you're saying, and that's the part I don't get, and I guess maybe I'm also not quite sure who you mean by that. And should I be implicated in it, by the way? Yeah.
So I mean, I guess the target is very general. It's more about really the attitude to the Cold War and what can we learn from the Cold War in terms of taking forward socialism as a project. It seems to me that the legacy of the Cold War is just not part of the kind of Western Marxist way of thinking about future socialism. The fact that there is this, in a way, historical defeat of socialism. It's as though, they didn't get it right and it was all wrong and it was just socialism in name and they didn't mean that, and so you kind of exclude it as something that is irrelevant to you, or you appropriate it in this very nostalgic way that doesn't actually in the end grapple with the real concerns of these societies. And I suspect the reason for that, I mean, it's not just kind of random and arbitrary. The reason for that is, I think, a gap in the Marxist tradition of just thinking about the theory of the state. So it seems to me that a lot of Marxists, not all of them, but many of them, have spilled a lot of ink and spent lots of resources in defending Marxism as an economic theory and thinking about socialism as an economic alternative to capitalism. But I think not enough in thinking about what version of democracy it entails, and how it engages with the state, and how it engages with the rule of law, with rights, with concepts of obligation, and in what position does it stand to the liberal tradition on that front. I think of a lot of the failure of the state socialist projects wasn't just to do with the collapse of planned economies. I think a lot of the failure was to do with the lack of democracy, because there was a sense of kind of neglect for this, what was considered a kind of overly liberal or sort of worry about like abstract rights and the rule of law and the kind of guarantees to freedom of movement and freedom of speech. And in part to do with the ideological critique, because there's obviously a very robust Marxist critique of liberal ideology, which shows you that, in the end, this is only the freedom of some and not of others.
No kidding.
All of our concepts of freedom of speech.
There's a very robust Marxist critique of liberal ideology, because they believe that liberal ideology, Enlightenment values, is freedom for some, but not freedom for others. Better doesn't always mean better for everyone. It always means worse for some. That was from The Handmaid's Tale.
Freedom of expression, freedom of association, in the end, only work for for the ruling elites in a way. They don't work for everyone. But I worry that there we kind of throw away the baby with the bathwater. And there's something about that tradition that needs to be defended, that liberal tradition about the state, about the law, about the system of rights, that need to be defended very, very strongly, and also to be taken very seriously in its failures when you think about how to develop an alternative project that kind of, in a way, tries to learn from the failures of the past, rather than just saying, oh, it's something that, you know, doesn't concern us because it was the Soviets, it was the Albanians, it was the Chinese, it was, you know, whoever tried to get this to get this project going from an institutional perspective. And so that's what I'm trying to recover and to hold on to. On the one hand, this idea of, yes, there is historical necessity and there's constraints and there's contingent historical reasons for why these societies failed, namely that they didn't have a liberal public sphere and they didn't really have a strong sense of the state, and they were all semi-feudal societies as they were engaging with the socialist project.
Real socialism has, well, no, socialism has failed because the failed socialist states didn't have a real conception of the state. That's what you just said. Because for those who maybe joined late, her entire premise at the beginning of this is, I shit you not, real socialism hasn't been tried because real socialism is in the future.
But a lot of it, I think, to do also with a gap in Marxist theory when it comes to thinking about politics and what is a specific radical democratic project that Marxists have when they develop their alternative.
I think, let me try translating it a little bit into my own understanding of it, which
Michael's going to talk for like 15 minutes now.
One of the things that you're pointing towards, indirectly at least, is the way Marxists in the dominant capitalist countries were pressured during the Cold War. You know, it was either so a lot of the Marxist tradition, even the so-called Western Marxist tradition, had to separate itself from Soviet orthodoxy, etc. You know, because of not and emphasize that critique of it. Like you were either that line, or you were against that line. And I think what you're pointing towards, which seems to me absolutely necessary, is a more nuanced appreciation and critique of the existing
cattail.
Socialist
I like
regimes.
The cattail.
You know, that there's a lot to learn from them without.
Cattail's the best part of this presentation right now.
Seems to me, that seems exactly right. But it's not a mystery to me that Marxists in the dominant countries, at least the ones, I mean, I'm the oldest of the three of us by far, and even it's really the ones older than me that I think had that that pressure. And
Jeffrey.
the Cold War had a certain kind of effect. Okay,
well played.
I'm sorry to distract Vanessa. The things, because in some ways Leah was posing things directly to you. I just wanted to jump in and clarify, and I do understand better now these points about the Cold War.
I think you should.
Vanessa,
absolutely.
Is it okay for you to jump in now?
Okay, so I'll speak mainly to the question, what do I see as the positive conception of freedom? So I'll start by saying a bit about how I think about freedom and necessities, and that was part of your question as well, Michael. So I think that, so of course there's been multiple attempts over the years to attempt to spell out what exactly the relationship is between freedom and necessity in Marx, and it's of special importance and centrality for Marx, because here we have this theorist who articulates a materialist conception of history, right, where materialism is historically in its treatment in various kind of philosophical contexts associated with determinism, with necessity, right, with that which is very much at odds with mind, spirit, right, the things with which we associate agency and freedom, right? And so then the thought is, well, if Marx is putting forward this materialist conception of history, how can that is somehow accommodating towards these things that we tend to associate with the ideal aspects of being, like mind, right? Desires, so on, things of that nature. So it's a real problem for Marx, especially because it's clear that he's not going to take one way out, which is to just say, oh, there is no such thing as agency. Obviously, he cares quite a lot about it, I agree with Leah that the way to think about the whole project is it's a human freedom project, right? That's the kind of central thing at stake. And
they're calling it the Human Freedom Project.
Well, is Marx able to?
They're calling communism the Human Freedom Project. God, that's some good branding.
Central to his theory is of utmost importance, right? It's directly relevant to the question of whether he has anything coherent, right, to tell us. So I think one of the things that has,
hang on,
at least within,
well, we hear more about how capitalism is freedom. I just want to comment on something Jeffrey said. This chat is well read. If you're new to my channel, you might not know this. I curate my chat like a mother effer. I want my chat to be a nice place to be, where smart people come, where we watch content and we talk about it. I don't do this open chat nonsense. Like, I will block anyone who is disrupting the calm and the peace of my chat. Now, you can yell at the people in the presentation. You can call them all sorts of names. I don't really care. But like this thing that goes on in most chats, like I don't do it. So I appreciate that you have noticed that the chat is well read, because I firmly believe that by curating my chat and the people who are able to comment and pipe in on my channel, I have created a much better experience for everyone involved. Because it's like, you look at some of these chats that exist on some of these channels, and it's like, they're a goddamn nightmare. I wouldn't want to participate in them at all. So I want to have a place where people can participate, where we can talk about ideas. And I've heard that people really appreciate the curation that I do on my channel. And I'm going to keep that up. That is why we have the 2 rules. Don't be a dick and no whining. That's it. But you can be a dick to these people. I don't care if you yell and swear and call these people names. I don't care about that at all. But we're going to be nice and good to each other and not engage in nonsense.
Anglophone context, certainly,
oh, Cat Butt is
and
back.
I think
Good.
Much more broadly than that, one of the things that has stymied attempts to think about freedom and determinism is oftentimes we think about them in ways that are modeled on the sort of question that someone like Descartes was asking, right? Or the sort of questions that occupy the minds of contemporary analytical philosophers. Namely, we think about these 2 things in rigid opposition, freedom and determinism, and then we ask, we want an answer true for all contexts, circumstances, and all time. In the case of human beings, how much determinism is at play, and how much freedom do they have? And we want a kind of static explanation of that. And if we try to put Marx's way of thinking about freedom and determinism, or freedom and necessity, into those terms, then we automatically end up misrepresenting it and misconstruing it. Because part of what's going on for Marx is that he is talking about the relationship between freedom and necessity as a historically developing interaction. So he gives us these accounts of early human beings as living lives that are, by and large, completely dominated by necessity, right? By deterministic laws, in particular by their material need for food, right? For whatever the conditions of the sheer biological survival of mammals of this type are, right? That's the thing that early human beings were after, finding food, finding shelter, finding warmth, and so on, right? And so that direct response to their biological needs and the attempt to satisfy those needs within whatever material context they were in, that absolutely dominates everything about their lives. But as they as they do this, right, and this is how we turn to a discussion of need for Marx, right? We know that Marx's account of human need is that as we intervene into our environments in order to satisfy our needs, we transform our environments, right? We transform ourselves. And if we transform our environments and ourselves as human beings and as individuals and as a species, then that means that we now have a new set of needs.
It's no coincidence that she said we need to transform ourselves as human beings, individuals, and as a species. And when we transform ourselves, then we will have new needs that can be accounted for in the new system.
Needs, which in turn, right, we must satisfy, thereby laying down what for Marx is the material basis of an in principle limitless proliferation of all sorts of human needs and human forms of activity and interaction with their natural and social environment aimed at satisfying their needs. As human beings greatly expand the ways that they interact with their environment, right? They figure out tools, they figure out fire, they figure out clothing, right? They have more and more time to develop tastes, right, and preferences. Culture, right, becomes richer and plays its role in determining what kinds of lives people live, what kinds of lives they prefer to live, and what kinds of lives they're able to live, right? And so you have just like this real practical proliferation of ways that human beings can make their subjective preferences part of the objective reality out there in the world, right? Impose their ideas onto material resources, and they're increasingly the kinds of dreams and desires and aspirations they have are more and more unmoored, right, from just the direct satisfaction of biologically necessary needs. And so what we have in Marx, I in my book, I talk about this as dialectical compatibilism, which is a term that I coined to describe
dialectical
this,
compatibilism
way that we have to think about first these kinds of very determined kinds of forms of life wto human beings' own preferences have very little impact, right? Aside from the bare preference not to die of starvation, right? So we start there. That's like we do have to understand human beings in that context, but it's human beings themselves in living in those highly determined conditions and engaging in behavior that is initially highly deterministic, right? But it's precisely that deterministic development of human beings and their ways of interacting with the world that then itself in practice gives rise to freedom, understood as a widely expanding array of ways that human beings can choose.
All right, I have no idea what she's saying other than I'm pretty sure she's fucking making up words that I don't okay, but I do have breaking news for those of you who are following the Twitter game that I'm playing. I think that Deb's gonna do it. I think Deb's gonna make it through the day. I do. And this is significant because Deb has not in 3 weeks, she has not in the last 3 weeks gone more than a single day without talking about me. And if Deb makes it through the next 4 hours without tweeting about me, she will set a new personal best at 2 days in a row. The goal is to get our 4 contestants to 30 days. Oh, Stevie, they all know about the game. They all know about it. Trust me, they're not happy about it. They're kicking and screaming like little kids. Like, they could literally win the game by just shutting the fuck up about me and never tweeting about me again. But I want to take our small victories, because Deb has been particularly awful at this game. Deb has been the biggest loser of the entire game. She has the lowest personal best. And if she gets to 2 days, that is a significant victory for Deb. And I think we should all congratulate her. I'll post about it after midnight. Of course, assuming she gets through the next 4 hours, she could still break. It absolutely could happen, but she seems to be distracted with housework or something. So I think she's going to make it. Deb, we're rooting for you. You too can break your addiction to tweeting about me. You too can do it. Yes. Deb, leave me alone. All of you, leave me alone. They're hate watching this right now, by the way. This whole little scene that I'm doing right now is going to get reported on Twitter in like 5 minutes, because they always hate watch me. But yeah, leave me the fuck alone. And Deb, congratulations if you make it through the next 4 hours on a new personal best. We know you can do it, Deb. Let's go for 3 days. Let's go all weekend. 3 days, Deb. I'm going to challenge you right now. Get through 3 days without talking about me. Just 1 day at a time. That's all that's required.
Choose to exist in the world based on their inner desires, their preferences, their talents, right? The things that they regard as worth doing and as good and fulfilling ways of spending their time and their efforts and their energy. And it's not just preference satisfaction, but actually being able to be more concretely the authors of their circumstances, which is what's at play in this process that I'm describing, where human beings less and less are just responding to the circumstances they find, and more can.
By the way, in case you guys didn't hear about this, and this is still related to the Twitter game, if you didn't hear about this, I kid you not, Carrie Smith on Monday on her channel is doing a stream with the fame whore Mike. Carrie Smith is the good Christian in the game. And on her channel, she's having the fame whore Mike Harlow, stepmom Deb Philman, and the queen from England who doesn't have a real name because he doesn't deserve it. All 4 contestants are going to be on Carrie Smith's channel on Monday, live. Maybe they'll talk about the game. I have no idea. So if anyone wants to watch that stream on Carrie's channel, because I'm sure as shit not going to do it. Like, if anyone is inclined to watch the 4 contestants of the Twitter game, or possibly to send in a super chat asking who they think might win the Twitter game, I think that'd be pretty great. All 4 contestants in one place. If only I had an intrepid volunteer to send Carrie in a super chat, I will totally reimburse you. If only I had an intrepid volunteer to send Carrie in a super chat asking our 4 contestants who they think is going to win the Twitter game. And to also tell me if they talk about me. Because if they talk about me on that stream, they all lose. In 1 day. Phil for the win. Phil, you may want to get like an incognito account. They're going to be looking for you now. Phil for the win. Phil, I bless you in your endeavors. Thank you. All right, let's keep going.
And exercise agency.
Sorry for that interlude.
Transforming those circumstances in the ways that they regard as consistent with their conditions of flourishing, and producing the circumstances that are then going to give them increased agency to direct their own development as human beings. And I see that as the sort of like overarching principle for Marx when we talk about freedom is a question of what is required, what historical processes are necessary so that human beings can truly
they have
be
not,
authors
Sean.
of themselves.
They have not.
I think when I am doing my work and I take it that to apply the materialist conception of history, one of the things it centrally means is to adopt as a working hypothesis that human life, human existence, human social being is a human product. It is all the consequence, right, of our doing as a species. But that is not fully realized yet, right? And so I think that freedom for Marx means making that process as fully actualized as possible and creating the circumstance.
Hang on. I swear to God, I'm going to start paying it. I can't do a spy stream of it, A, because I don't want to, but B, I have a meeting at that time. I have a standing meeting at that time, so I can't spy stream it. But, and I don't want to watch it. I'm sorry. I just don't want to watch it because it's like, these people are so toxic. Like, it hurts me to even look at their Twitter feed. Like, it's so toxic. And so I am sorry to people in advance. If you choose to watch that stream, you need to like smudge after, you need to take a shower or something, because like I ain't effing watching it. No. So I'm sorry, guys. I can't. There's only so much toxicity I can take. And the four of them together on one stream, yeah, spy stream. It would be funny. It would be fucking hilarious. Let's just be honest about it. If I did a meta stream of the four of them, it would be fucking hilarious and they would be so pissed. But I can't because I have a standing meeting on Monday. I'm sorry, I can't do it. It is an important meeting that I can't cancel.
Within which human beings can exercise agency over producing themselves as a species in the way that they wish to be. And now we're talking about communism, right? Now we're talking about conditions where human beings recognize their conditions of flourishing as the same as the conditions of flourishing for other members of their species, for their fellows, right? We're talking about human beings exercising the kind of control, rational, goal-oriented control over socially necessary resources so that this kind of agency that I'm describing can occur, because it's one thing to be able to dream a dream and it's another thing to actually have the material resources that allow you to have this kind of agency and control over human existence. Your own, and both on the individual basis and for society, to be able to intervene in its own development in a rational way.
That's great, and I have a question.
Michael has no idea what
questions for both of you.
He has no idea what she just
and you
said.
can choose which one you want.
He has no idea what she just said.
Vanessa, maybe you first in this, but yeah, both questions have to do with my own limitations. You know.
Oh, we know, Michael. We know.
To help me, maybe, which is that
we know
both of you are quite comfortable posing these questions in terms of ethics and morality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And partly I think that's related when each of you are talking to the notion of the human and of a certain humanism here. You know, I have an allergy to morality and ethics both, because for me at least the standard discourses, of course, and many things go under these terms with different authors, come back to individual choices and reinforcing the individual as the unit of action and of decision and of thought, etc. And so I'm much more comfortable thinking of these questions in what I consider political terms rather than moral or ethical terms. So that's one thing that I don't even know if there's a way of telling me, Michael, you've got it all wrong, or how to figure, and if ethics or morality works differently for you. So that's one. So you could also ignore that one, because my other one is that in the whole discussion about freedom, also freedom is a difficult concept for me.
No.
And I'm much more inclined to
Wrong.
think in terms of liberation. And even in the distinction between liberation and emancipation.
Freedom is liberation. What are they liberating us from? What does liberation mean? Anytime we hear the words liberation or abolition, what do they mean? I know you guys know this. This is a pop quiz for the chat. Freedom is liberation. Liberation from what? What does he mean when he says liberation? Capitalism! That's what they mean. Anytime they say liberation or abolition, you need to think liberation from capitalism, liberation from capitalism. If we liberate ourselves from capitalism, we will be truly free. That's what they mean.
Which I take to be, the
And
simple
capitalism
version
is
that
individualism.
I see
Yes,
emancipation
Catherine,
as
absolutely.
the removal of chains, but not a transformation of the subjects who were enchained, that they are emancipated from their chains. Whereas I see liberation as the transformation also of the subject who was enslaved or et cetera previously. But in each case, both of them I think I see as processes that of course don't end or realized. I mean, I see, so anyway, that partly might be why I'm trying to reflect why I myself don't use freedom, but instead do often focus on liberation. And I guess if I'm wondering if those resonate with you. So these are totally different questions. The first one has more to do, I think, with your own philosophical bases and references and even a technical misunderstanding. The second one actually might be more substantially political about how we think about freedom in relationship to or maybe you mean the same thing and I'm just using different terms. Okay. Why don't you start if you have a way, Vanessa, with these, just a way of engaging, see what.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll actually start with the first question, but I'll make my way to the second. So I think, so I made a sort of joke, that it was totally fair to be skeptical about an ethical or moral perspective in Marx, but I mean that, there's copious good reason to be highly skeptical of it. Maybe chief among those reasons, the fact that Marx absolutely blisteringly excoriates every moral theory that he ever comes in contact with throughout the course of his writings.
This is fun, Luke.
Marx,
I think so. We're joking. We're learning. We're making fun of socialists.
Morality in the Communist Manifesto, and
we're reading
Marx
the Communist Manifesto right now.
Communists do not preach morality. So those are all extremely good reasons to be highly skeptical of it. I think, especially I'll focus on Marx's argument that the communists do not preach morality. And I think that one of the reasons, and this ties into your point about individualism and the addressee of moral injunctions, right? I think when Marx and Engels say that the communists do not preach morality, well, first of all, I guess they don't preach to anybody, but they do talk to people. And who is it that they're talking to? And one of the things that distinguishes them from other theorists in their milieu is that they're definitely not talking to the people in power.
50-cent word.
They're talking to disempowered people. They're talking to working people, right? And so therefore the communists have no need to preach morality because, in my view, anyway, the entire content of morality on a Marxist theory is proletarian revolution, is emancipation, right? Whatever kinds of terms we want to use for this, is the liberation of working people. And so
liberation of working people means the state owns the means of production.
Morality to the people.
When she says the liberation of working people, she means that the state owns the means of production and they've been liberated from working for an oppressive boss that is part of the bourgeoisie capitalism class. That's what she means. She believes people will be liberated when there are no more bosses, no more private property, because bosses inherently oppress workers, and workers are completely disempowered to make their own decisions. And when we eliminate bosses, then people will be truly free. But who owns the means of production when we eliminate bosses? It's the state.
With whom they are in conversation, they can just put their whatever might have a kind of normative, injunctive sort of content, they can express it entirely in terms of the economic, political, and social interests of the working class. And this is part of what is transformational about Marx's approach to morality, because it doesn't have to remain a merely ethical phrase for him. It doesn't
well, they forget this point, right? They forget
something
this.
that involves a kind of sacrifice of oneself for society. Another of my favorite passages in Marx, there he's referring, this is in his treatment of Max Stirner, which makes up part of the documents that are compiled into the Critique of the German Ideology. Marx says, well, Stirner thinks that the communists want to sacrifice for society. No, we want to sacrifice society to ourselves, right? We want to sacrifice this existing, unjust is a question-begging term here, but we want to sacrifice, this existing destructive, inhumane, irrational society with its death drive to the needs of humanity, right?
Well, we want to sacrifice society for ourselves. What did I say? The goals of the woke left are gain as much power as possible to destabilize the system, attack capitalism, and then usher in their Marxist utopia. She just literally told you the 4 points that I've been telling you guys are their goals over and over and over and over and over again for months, right? We're going to listen to that again. We're going to listen to that one more time just to make sure we really heard it. But what she said is they want to sacrifice society, tear it down, and replace it with their little Marxist utopia. And they've been telling us in this entire presentation, when we replace the current system, which is capitalism, with their system, which is an empowered working class that is freed from the bosses and the bourgeoisie, then they will be truly free. When they're liberated from capitalism, then when they will be truly free. But let's listen to that again. That was such a nice little clip. Don't worry, guys. I'm not clipping right now, but I will clip these at some point.
The documents that are compiled into the Critique of the German Ideology. Marx says, well, Stirner thinks that the communists want to sacrifice for society. No, we want to sacrifice society to ourselves, right? We want to sacrifice this existing, unjust is a question-begging term here, but we want to sacrifice, this existing destructive, inhumane, irrational, society with its death drive to the needs of humanity, right? Sorry, things are happening on the screen a little bit. With that being said,
yes. So she wants to sacrifice the U.S. She wants to sacrifice us. Yes. 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 When she calls it a death cult, that's pure projection, folks. They believe that people will only be free when they are liberated from capitalism. I think we just got our money shot. Maybe that's just me.
then the question is, well, why think about things in an ethical way, right? Or why, if Marx is arguing explicitly that it's unnecessary, and I think that the fact of the matter is that we still live in class society. Obviously, we live amongst these contradictions. We live among these various oppositions. And if it's true that the content of a kind of Marxist ethical perspective, really is coincident with a theory of proletarian revolution, that seems to me like more, not less, reason to be interested in what it looks like to think about these things from through an ethical lens. I think especially Marx wrote.
I feel like Leah is going through the realization that perhaps her little conception of what a true socialist future looks like may not be as free as she thought it was. She's not going to admit that, of course, but I really feel like she's going, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, but she's never going to admit it because then she'd sacrifice her career.
So much, constantly, all throughout his career, criticizing various kinds of ethical perspectives. I think it's very hard to make sense of that if we're too dismissive and too quick about sweeping aside the question of what then is a Marxist perspective on ethics, because he could have easily said ethics sucks, and then not spent all that time writing about Bentham and J.S. Mill and Kant and Malthus, right, and all the various ways that he engaged with ethical reasoning. Max Stirner, that whole thing against Stirner is just a 400-page argument against ethical egoism, right? So that being said, this question of, addressing himself to a class and not primarily to, the kind of like advice to individuals, right, that morality often provides, I think that's really salient and really necessary in order to understand what's going on with Marx with respect to ethics. That being said, Marx, I won't say the way I read Marx. I'll say this as an objective truth, which is that consistently throughout his writing, Marx again and again and again criticizes capitalism on the basis of its complete inability to promote the development of individuals and their ability to flourish as individuals, and again recommends communism on precisely that basis, right? And so, I don't know how we're doing on time. I won't go into a whole discussion of
so you're saying that objectively Marx wanted to destroy capitalism and have a communist utopia? You don't say. And I know we all knew that already. If for no other reason, then we're reading the Communist Manifesto in my locals book club right now. And we're going to have book club next week. If you're a member of my locals, you can come to Communist Manifesto book club. But yeah, I have to appreciate, I have to really give mad respect to Vanessa for making it just so crystal clear what the objective is and where all this is coming from. I just like, that was just like, Vanessa's like one of those people that like, Vanessa can't keep a secret. Vanessa's always going to spill the beans. She's always going to say the unsaid thing. A little bit like me in that regard. I totally do that sometimes, but like not all the time, because like I do actually know how to keep a secret. But like if I don't care, I'm gonna spill the fucking beans. But like you can tell, like she's the one that like is the talker at the party. That like you can get the gossip from her. She's gonna tell you what's really going on, right? she's like, yeah, we really do want to sacrifice all of society to communism. Yes, correct. That's absolutely what we want to do. And Marx wanted to do that too. The objective truth is Marx was very clear in all of his writings that he thought that capitalism was bad and communism was good. Yeah, Vanessa has tea stains all over the floor.
individualism or an individuality in Marx. But I think similarly, similar to what we've said already about freedom, Marx has a very robust critique of bourgeois individualism or capitalist individualism, and then what it means to recognize human. Of course, we're individuals.
You know what? Vanessa is like my new favorite person in the world because she is spelling out clearly and specifically that every single time they use the word individualism, they mean capitalism. Every single time they say rugged individualism is white supremacy, which is in the white supremacy culture document that ended up in the Smithsonian in mid 2020. They said that rugged individualism is white supremacy. This, by the way, is taught in organizational diversity trainings all over the country, that to be an individualist, to be a white supremacist. Where does that come from? Individualism is capitalism. Whiteness does not mean your skin color. It means capitalism. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Andrew says the only consistent in Marx's writings is how he's an actual racist, abusive, deplorable individual who should not be listened to. Thank you, Andrew.
Right, and this is, and we have constituted ourselves as individuals.
Hang on, I want to rewind. I want to listen to that glory again. That was just fucking beautiful.
Or an individuality in Marx, but I think similarly, similar to what we've said already about freedom, Marx has a very robust critique of bourgeois individualism or capitalist individualism, and then what it means to recognize human. Of course, we're individuals, right? And this is, and we have constituted ourselves as individuals exactly through the process that I described a moment ago, right? This is why Marx talks about human beings transforming themselves from herd animals, right, to individuals. The more ways we can choose from amongst ways to be, ways to do our hair, ways to write, ways to make music, the more that we constitute ourselves as individuals. And I think, I actually think that's just freedom under another description, in fact.
Yeah, just alternative freedom. Alternative freedom.
I can't really add a lot to that because I think I agree. I guess
stunning and brave
maybe
queen.
One line on your concern with liberation and emancipation. So I think of liberation and emancipation as collective categories that have to do with the collective process of search for freedom, but I don't see them as antithetical to freedom. To me, freedom is the kind of motivating ideal, and then liberation and emancipation are the kind of historically situated ways of understanding social struggles that are all struggles for freedom in a way. So I don't see the contrast. The one thing I was going to say, just to add something non-Marxist, but kind of connected to Marx, to what Vanessa was saying, I feel like this decision about, what kind of Marxism to endorse, whether a moral Marxism or a different kind of Marxism, is somehow made when you read The Republic, and you have this debate between Socrates and Thrasymachos on the sources of power. And Thrasymachos basically says, look, all power is ideology, all power is what the powerful make you believe. And Socrates says, no, there is a kind of source of power that is reasons. And I happen to think that the Marxian tradition is much more compatible with that way of thinking about power than the one that says, all power is ideology. But of course, politics is power, but there is a justification for power. And I think the one that Marx wants to reject is exactly the power of the powerful. He wants to appeal to a source of power that is something that can be justified to human beings as human beings, not as, either bourgeois or as proletarians. And when he, in the early writings, espouses the kind of cause of the working classes, he says, well, this is because this is the cause of the human beings, of the kind of human species as a whole. And so there is a kind of universal drive to the emancipation of the working class, which is exactly what makes the working class a universal class, as he puts it. So I think this is just a kind of little coda to what Vanessa was saying. I completely agree with her.
If I can jump back in, I just want to say how glad I am that you said that, and I absolutely agree. And these are exactly the kinds of considerations that first got me set off on trying to understand what is a Marxist perspective on ethics, because I think sometimes Marxism is wrongly thought of as just a kind of set of instructions for how the proletariat can come to power. And, you know, if it were just that, that's quite impressive. That would be great. But it is much more than that. I mean, Marx and Engels purport to be producing a science, right, of history. And I think that the considerations you just raised are exactly what makes that a plausible way, right, to think about what it is that they're doing, because they really are attempting to articulate objective, universal.
I just made one of the stupidest knitting mistakes I have ever made in my life. And I blame it entirely on these bitches. This is going to be such a... Oh my... Fuck these bitches. Made me fuck up my knitting. I'm going to have to redo a whole row. God damn it.
Universal aims that they see as already inherent in human agency, right? And they're describing that and also attempting to articulate what is necessary in order to allow that to flourish and develop.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I was just finding myself, I think I agree exactly when you said, Leah, that you see liberation as a collection of as a collective project. There you go. And I guess maybe what the distinction, I'm trying to reason through how my own terminological preferences here, or conceptual, that liberation for me is a matter of focusing and struggling against
It's a fixable mistake. Don't worry. It's fine. It's just going to be a pain in the ass.
Yeah, or structures of social domination. Whereas
it was a stupid mistake. I should have known better.
And this is what I'm trying to work through here. Freedom can sometimes be used to think not structurally, but in terms of individuals. And I think that's where my conceptual preferences lie. I'm also less concerned with the human as a base point than the two of you are. That's
yeah, that's probably a good idea, Andrew. That's a great idea. Remind me of that after book couple.
I had a slightly different question that might shift gears that I wanted to ask you to, which is about in my view, at least, there are a number of projects that are focused on freedom or freedom and liberation.
Can't even turn off his cell phone.
In the last few decades, in different, somewhat slightly different traditions. I was thinking of Linda Zerilli's book about F for Freedom, I believe it's called, in terms of that feminist theory needs to come back to a question about freedom and liberation within Black studies and Black politics. I was thinking about Fred Moten in this regard, making a similar insistence in The Break, and many other authors. So I guess I'm partly thinking about how the two of you, if there are links in which you see your interest in freedom fitting within contemporary traditions. Like the contemporary literature authors and the ways that we should put it. And going along with that, I guess this was Philip's question from earlier, which is whether the concept for freedom works with or poses a difference for you with other concepts that might function in allied terms like justice or democracy. Like, why is it that freedom and or liberation, I'm imposing myself, I'm sorry, might be the key terms rather than democracy or justice as the key term?
He's still coming back to this language thing.
I don't know if that's really two separate questions. Like one is about other projects that you feel close to, but maybe with them, why is it this term? Why is it freedom rather than justice, democracy. Now I'm just ventriloquizing for Philip, but I think I'm doing it accurately. Okay, whichever of you are. Leah, you're unmuted, so maybe you should start.
Okay, great. So I think maybe I'll start at the very end. I see freedom as connected to justice and democracy. Actually, I just see freedom as the foundation of both of these things. So for me, democracy is one particular way of realizing freedom at a collective level, where I start with this kind of very Kantian, and justice to some extent is connected to this idea of democracy in the same way. I start with this very Rousseauian kind of Kantian idea, which is that in society, we want to have freedom, and we want to have a kind of freedom that brings together the individual and the collective in the right way. And I think democracy is the type of rule that enables people to achieve just that. And of course, it's not democracy in the way in which, you know, it's often impoverished, the term it's impoverished, because I don't think liberal, or what goes as liberal democracy, is actually real democracy, because it's kind of bounded.
We don't mean democracy. When we say democracy, we don't mean democracy.
Constraints of political power, by economic power. But to me, democracy is a very important idea of political rule, precisely because it is connected to freedom, because it's the kind of system in which, you know, as Rousseau says, we all make rules together by being as free as we were without being before we were in society, something like that. So basically, I think these are, both democracy and justice are institutional forms of realizing this foundational ideal, which is freedom at the end. And I think on your first, I guess your first concern, which is that you say freedom is not used to think structurally, but with individuals in mind. I mean, first of all, I would say that even if you only have individuals in mind, capitalism is a kind of system that actually fails individuals. It only favors some individuals, but fails most individuals on a global scale.
How?
And this is also partly why I think freedom was actually really important in a certain kind of anti-colonial Marxist tradition, because they start precisely with this emancipatory idea, which is, look, we want to take freedom seriously. We want to take freedom that you take seriously. It's just that you're not doing it. And I think this is really important.
You just aren't doing freedom correctly.
Also to challenge the liberals, to say, look, I care about the same thing as you do. It's just that the economic system that you have built up doesn't enable you to realize your very own ideals. And so it develops a kind of immanent critique of capitalism that shows you how socialism is a necessity by starting with that immanent critique. And I think that's a very powerful tool. And so it's powerful because, you know, even if you just worry about the individuals, you better worry about all individuals everywhere in the world, not just some individuals in some part of the world. And then because with this idea of freedom, I think you can also build in a concern with social structures that goes just beyond the types of unfreedom that liberals have in mind when they think about unfreedom, when they think about oppression. You know, a state that, for example, circumscribes freedom, or a state that kind of prevents people from having freedom of speech, freedom of association, but that don't see hunger as a kind of also equally fundamental form of unfreedom. And I think that enables you to expand the range rather than restrict it. And I think it's actually part of what makes great the socialist tradition in a way, is that it can take on the liberals precisely on the thing that is most concerning to them.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I'll say is I don't know that on my view, I necessarily think of freedom as the central concept, although it's certainly a central concept. And as I was thinking about how
is anyone surprised that Vanessa doesn't think of freedom as that important?
I was like, do I have one central concept?
I am not at all surprised.
Of my articulation, right, of a Marxist perspective, of a socialist perspective. I think for me that word would actually be labor, in, you know, I don't know, like unreconstructed communist sense or whatever, but I think labor is the word that I would put at the center. The reason being that when we think from the perspective of labor, we're already thinking about activity, agency, and production, and hopefully the circumstances within those processes occur and unfold. And I think that it is by looking at the world from the perspective of labor, and that is to say, from the perspective of already ongoing active intervention and interaction with our natural and social environments in order to achieve an aim, I think that starting from that perspective is precisely what allows us, for example, to have a better understanding of what freedom is, where it comes from, what thwarts it, what the conditions of its manifestation might be. So yeah, I would certainly labor would be my answer, and yeah, and to say a little bit more about this question of individualism.
Here we go.
Individuals.
Here we go. She's gonna say something juicy.
I mean, one of the there's a number of like really curious things that Marx says. One of them is right in the manifesto, where he explains that in order to have real freedom, it would be necessary for the proletariat to make, he says, despotic inroads on private property, right?
Oh!
What usually like despots don't go around saying, I'm gonna despot today. So why does he
for people to have real freedom? We gotta get rid of that private property, man. We gotta pirate that private property. That private property is not freedom. That was like, bro, Vanessa, we need to start watching every single thing that Vanessa has ever said on the internet in her life. Yes. You will own nothing and you will be happy. That's what she just said. Yeah, look at Michael's like, yes. Yes, queen. Yes, queen. Pillage that private property. Let's just enjoy that again. Like, you could feel it coming. Andrew in the chat. He was like, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. The tea is coming. It's going to be spilled. And then it was like, private property. Boom. Let's just watch that part again.
One of the, there's a number of like really curious things that Marx says. One of them is right in the manifesto, where he explains that in order to have real freedom, it would be necessary for the proletariat to make, he says, despotic inroads on private property, right? What usually like despots don't go around saying, I'm gonna despot today. So why does he use that word? And he's being ironic, as he often is, but he also means it. Because the kinds of interventions that the masses of society are going to have to make are ones that are unjustifiable from the perspective of private property. We're not going to be able to borrow any of the moral language or priorities or what liberal morality regards as an absolutely inviolable right. None of that are we going to be able to invoke to justify, the seizure of fuel resources, right? Of the land that's necessary for people to have places to live and so on, right? Or in other places too, Marx talks about the role of unions, and he talks about the sort of freedom of the contract of the individual to meet another individual on a theoretically, abstractly equal basis and make their own free decisions about what to agree to. And this is precisely what is prevented by union contract, right? Because the worker cannot just, in those cases, agree to whatever they feel like, right? They're bound by this contract that's arbitrated by the union.
Do you think they're going to be able to agree whatever they feel like under communism?
Materials that
really?
come from corporations, this is precisely what they usually go to. They say, look at how these unions want to prevent your freedoms. You have this freedom to agree to any contract you want, and it's God-given and inviolable. And it's the basis, of course, of liberal political life. And these unions want to take it away. And Marx describes this as one of the ways in which, if we think about these things dialectically and the way that a thing can contain its own opposite, in this case, workers organizing together to limit one type of freedom is the thing that actually allows for the we're going real, the more robust, the more human.
War is peace, freedom is slavery.
To actually exert
negotiation is control
over their circumstances.
I don't know.
Of employment, as opposed to the illusory control, right, of the individual, non-collectively negotiated contract, right? And so there's all kinds of ways where, in practice, embracing, one kind of limitation,
like
on the so-called freedoms.
Like someone said it in the chat. Hang on. Yeah, I think it was who was? Yeah, Luke. The state is the ultimate union, honey. You really think under your little communist utopia that you aren't going to be met with like the same problem that you have with unions? My God. And Phil is absolutely correct. None of these people have ever worked in the private sector in their lives. They've always worked in academia. And I understand this. I worked in academia for 10 years. So I understand the mindsets of these people. Like, the private sector is a whole other ballgame. God. All right, guys. We got about 5 more minutes left of this. We're almost done. Hang in there. You're doing great. It's a great night. This is like a banner night for Socialism Saturday. I'm really pleased with this.
That are guaranteed in liberal society is what actually allows the conditions for human beings to have real authority and agency over their lives, over their conditions of work, right? And I think that's just one of the ways in which he offers a really complex, right, and rich way of thinking about this relationship between individual and society, and what it means to reconcile that seeming contradiction, rather than just trying to sort of manage it in the way that liberal societies do.
I am looking to try to respect our time of things, and I was wondering if maybe we should wrap up here, and if you had accumulated last things you wanted to be sure to get to. I wanted to give either of you time to come back to topics or yeah, I don't know, clarify things that I misunderstood, just that sort of thing. Do you have, Leah, do you have, are there some things accumulated that you wanted to be sure to get to, or?
No, it's fine.
No, okay.
No, done. Nothing left to say.
I feel satisfied with the discussion,
Okay.
which was
No, I'm very
really lovely. Yeah.
Vanessa and I don't disagree enough. So
I know, right?
Oh, Philip is back. He hasn't done his dishes yet.
Philip, I can see that Philip just rejoined us. So Philip, I can pass to you.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for a fascinating discussion, and a prelude to 4 more days of fascinating discussions. And
oh my God,
let the viewers go, I'd like to clue you in as to what we have coming up.
All right.
This afternoon at 3
We don't
p.m.,
need to do this.
What was neoliberalism?
We don't need to do this. Guys, you have been watching Socialism Saturday. We were watching Red May tonight with the socialist conception or the communist conception of freedom. We have so many more videos on this YouTube channel we can go through. They're all fucking gold. But thank you for a wonderful, rousing night in the chat. You guys have been really, really great. Beastly Nerd says, Carlin, this ish giving me a headache. All this word salad just to say they want free ish and not have to work for it. I understand, Beastly Nerd. I really do. But, you know, we really hit on some elements of gold tonight. I've got some great clips that I can make from that. And I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. Socialism Saturday is when we watch genuine socialist or communist content. We talk about it. We talk about the parallels we're seeing in culture. We get a little preview into our future dystopian reality. I do them on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Most Saturdays. I don't think I've taken one off in a while, but you know, I'm not going to promise every Saturday because like I have a life too. But like I've been on a fairly good clip, so just pay attention to the channel. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, I hope I will earn your subscription tonight. I do all sorts of content throughout the week. Like, I've got a crazy range of content. I talk about news, I talk about woke, I talk about politics. I'm starting to do short videos. Like, I'm really experimenting right now. I'm really kind of seeing where I want to go with it. So I hope you guys will follow along for this ride. I'm really enjoying it. I'm having a great time. And I do want to remind you guys that if you would like to keep in touch, the very best place to do that is by joining my locals community and becoming a supporter there. kb.locals.com/support. We are right now reading the Communist Manifesto for book club. We're having book club next Saturday at 3 p.m. to discuss. So you can join us. Still plenty of time to read it because it's really short. So you got plenty of time to read it. We also have movie night tomorrow. And we're going to be watching, I'm pretty sure, Nightmare on Elm Street. So now's a great time to become a member of Locals. And you can join for free. If you're not ready to pay and be a supporter, that's totally cool, man. Just head to kb.locals.com and you can join for free. You can kind of see what the community is about. I have the best community on all of Locals. And I will see you next week. It's been a pleasure, but we aren't comrades on this channel. We're comrades on this channel. Thank you, guys. I hope you have a good night. We'll see